So, Dr. Davis, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate your interest.
Well, you've got the floor. What's going on with cell phones?
Well, first of all, as you indicated, most people don't realize that they're two-way microwave radios. And if they understood that, it would make them think very differently about it. But the term that we use to describe the radiation from a cell phone is microwave radiation. Well, it really, industry calls it radio frequency energy. Radio frequency energy sounds like something very nice. After all, radios make music. We all need extra energy. But it's not energy. It's radiation. Now, television towers send radiation out to your television, which receives it. But a cell phone works by sending and receiving microwave radiation 900 times a minute. That's every 900 milliseconds. Whether you're talking or not, so long as that phone is on, if it's in your pocket, if it's in your bra, if it's next to your head, it's sending or receiving a microwave signal every 900 milliseconds. And because of that, it has the ability, as you indicated before, to disturb our DNA, to weaken our membranes, and to cause things that are in our body to be more deeply absorbed. It's interesting, but if people don't believe this is a problem, they should go to our website, environmentalhealthtrust.org, and click on or search for cell phone survivors and non-survivors. There we have videos from people who have suffered the real consequences of using phones in ways that have caused themselves, unfortunately, to have brain cancer. And I think they're very moving stories that people need to hear more about.
Your site has a lot of links to mainline studies. Can we go back to the beginning, cell phones the last 30 years? Because I've talked to former Air Force, Army people who would talk about setting up microwave relay towers in the desert and things to communicate, and how it would end up giving everybody in the team cancer 10 years later, 20 years later, or how they would put food in front of it and heat it up, heat up their beans with it. Well, cell phones are just doing that on a smaller scale, but cumulatively, I mean, we know it's in the studies that it's literally breaking up the DNA, disturbing the cells. It's been in the Time magazine. It's been in the Washington Post. What's crazy is this isn't really even denied, except industry tries to whitewash it. So where is it all going?
Well, let's stop for a second. I think you're absolutely right about, by the way, the old studies from the military. I've talked to guys who used microwave radiation to warm themselves on the deck of an aircraft carrier before they realized that it might be damaging. And that's how they discovered we could make microwave ovens, by the way, is somebody was standing in front of the radar tower, and the chocolate in their pocket melted. So the first microwave ovens, in fact, were called radar ranges, because guys who invented them thought it would be really cool to cook with radar. Well, it turned out not to be such a cool idea for women, so they renamed it microwave. It sounded more dainty and more easy to sell to women, which it turned out to be. Where we are with the issue is the following. Microwave ovens cook food, and they use 1,000 watts of power, but the same frequency as a cell phone. So you've got power and you've got frequency. A cell phone is far too weak to cook anything. It has less than 1 watt of power, but it does have the same frequency as a microwave oven. And right away there, we tend to lose people, because it's not the power that's most important with cell phone radiation. It's the nature of the signal that is sent. And the signal is not a steady, continuous wave. It's irregular.
Which is meant to make all the different little particles bounce around, correct?
Exactly. And it works. It works very effectively for many purposes. But what it does, it sends information, it receives information, but the signal itself changes its power density in a 4-second phone call more than 20 times. So it's going 20 times up and down. And it's that up and down, it's that erratic signal, it's that bouncing that disturbs our cellular resonance. Every cell in our body is resonating normally to keep us in place, in balance. And cell phone radiation distracts that normal balance, that normal homeostasis, and it can weaken membranes, whether of the eye or of the hearing nerve or of the brain. And those weakened membranes are then more vulnerable to damage. In fact, cell phone-like radiation is being used now in medicine to enhance the delivery of some drugs into the brain for chemotherapy. So there's even a new field called electrochemotherapy, which uses a different kind of electricity in order to deliver drugs into the body. So we know that a cell phone-like radiation has biological effects. I think the problem we have is a disconnect, which is the title of my book, Disconnect: The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation, What Industry Has Done to Hide It, and How to Protect Your Family. And that book can be found, by the way, on Amazon or even as an ebook. If you buy the cover with the scream on it, then Environmental Health Trust, my nonprofit, benefits from it more.
Everyone should read this book, and I'm going to buy 10 copies, literally, and I'm going to give it to my family and say, let's stop putting the cell phones up to our heads. Or are you recommending just getting rid of them entirely?
No, 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 no. I do not recommend getting rid of them because they have revolutionized our ability to respond to emergencies. They have improved our ability to do a lot of things, but we have a right to know. We have a fundamental right to know how to use them more safely. And by the way, I've recently spoken to people, and the glacial U.S. government is responding. After 18 years, they have issued a formal request to ask whether they should change their 18-year-old standards for cell phones. So they're looking at the data, not very quickly, but they've started the process. In addition, if you go deep within your iPhone, you'll find advice now about how to use them safely. If you go to settings on your iPhone, and then you go to general, and from general, you go to about, and then in about, you go all the way down to something most people would never see called legal. You click on legal, and it gives you RF exposure information, and there it says, buried in the phone, to reduce RF exposure, use a headset or a hands-free option, and also says, do not keep the phone closer than 10 millimeters to the body, or you can exceed the as-tested exposure limits.
Incredible. And in fact, was one of my crew a few months ago pointed that out, that not just on iPhones, but on most droids, in legal, they're covering their butts now.
Yep.
And quietly slipping it in, if you read through dozens of pages of stuff, that, oh, this is something people should be concerned about. What about some of the studies I've seen that some people appear to be more almost allergic to frequency pollution, and so that's why it's worse for other people?
Certainly, there are some people who are much more sensitive to this. It's been very, very difficult to study because the studies have taken people, a very small number, I should say, and looked for an immediate reaction. Some people don't have an immediate reaction. Their reaction occurs within a couple hours when they're finished with the, quote, study. There have been a few studies, one done by Andrew Marino, who's in Texas, where he's looked at a physician who complained of this problem and was able to see changes in her brain and in subtle measures of her nervous system that could not be apparent to her, that he could record when she was being exposed or not exposed. We think that there is a small percentage of people who are quite responsive and reactive to this, but everybody does react in some way. Some people are aware of it, some people are not aware of it. And the problem has been that we have no serious research underway on this issue whatsoever. And that's why what we're calling for is a 2 cents a month campaign. Would you give 2 cents? Would you give 2 cents from the consumer, from the manufacturer, and from the provider to create a massive fund that would exist for 8 years to train doctors and engineers in this field? Because it's a very obscure field in which very few people have training. I spent years working in toxicology and epidemiology, and I knew very little about this issue when I first encountered it when my first grandchild was born. And I became very interested in how bright he was, he still is, and how quickly he, at 9 months of age, could crawl over, take a cell phone, turn it on, and play a game. And as I began to look into what was known about the developing brain, I became shocked. Because
well, that's a whole other area. I mean, the studies are legion, and even mainline medical doctors like yourself and others are saying, do not give kids these. They're wiring their brains. It's wiring them in a bad way. And then I go to the grocery store, or I go to a restaurant, nobody's kids are talking to mommy and daddy now. They are on these tablets. They are on these phones. And then you got smart meters on the house radiating us. All the new appliances are hooked into it. And this is a totally unstudied area, as you were saying, and it's just ubiquitous now. We're being bathed. Google's launching blimps and drones that are going to bring in microwave communication everywhere. I mean,
They're calling for something called the Baby Safe Project with the head of OBGYN at Yale University, Dr. Hugh Taylor, who is the chief of obstetrics and gynecology there, and a number of other prominent doctors, including Andrew Weil. And the Baby Safe Project basically says pregnant women should avoid direct exposure to the pregnant abdomen from cell phones and from tablets, because we know that anything held directly on the body is going to get into the body. Let me tell you something about tablets. All of these tablets being used in all of these schools around this country, being sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. The tablet is tested to be used on a table 20 centimeters from an adult male body. They are not supposed to be held by young children. And what we tell people is disconnect from the internet. If you must give a wireless device to a child, whether a phone or a tablet, make sure it's no longer on the internet. Put it on airplane mode and recognize something. If you go to our website, ehtrust.org, you will find on that site clear information about digital dementia, which has occurred in Korean children, so that the Korean psychiatrists are warning about this. It's a lack of development of the brain.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the government's trying to ban kids now on their screen time in Korea because it's literally turning them into zombies.
I actually have a column on Huffington Post on e-zombies, and I would really appreciate your linking to that information, as well as on our website, we've got stories about this that are very important for people to understand. You're not doing your child a favor if he learns to read at age 3 or 4 by glued to a screen. That's when children need to be held. That's when they need to be talked to. That's when they need to learn how to use their fine, stubby fingers and coordinate their eyes and their hands. And if we raise a generation that's digitally sophisticated at these young ages, we are short-circuiting some of the brain development that neuropsychiatrists understand is quite critical. We are creating a generation that lacks the ability to have empathy, that lacks the ability to look you in the eye and anticipate the consequences of actions. Think about that what that would mean.
It's almost like artificial sociopaths, and that's what I'm seeing with people that have just the last 10 years been on iPhones and on tablets and things. People don't talk. We've all seen the film footage, people falling into fountains or walking into streets, and it literally is creating a bunch of unconnected type people. And then you were mentioning, Doctor, some of the studies out there of what screen time's doing to little kids.
Right. And in fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time for children under the age of 2 at all, and then limited use afterwards. And Israel, with all the things going on in Israel right now, they just this week launched a website in Hebrew, but it can be translated, with safety information for parents and children, because they are so deeply concerned about the use of this device. And in Israel, they recommend no Wi-Fi in kindergartens and with young children whatsoever. And we are blanketing our schools with Wi-Fi without realizing that there is no proof that digital learning actually teaches children things that they retain, and that the old-fashioned way of learning with reading and pencil and paper and crayon really works for the brain. It's not just a question of being old-fashioned and hanging on to basic reading, writing, arithmetic. That way of learning where a child...
Sure, I mean, it's genetic that we've always done it that way, so that's how our brain gets activated. I don't even know how humanity's going to survive this. I want to ask you where you think it's all going, Doctor. Amazing. ehtrust.org. When we come back, we'll plug that website one more time. Well, she's one of the leading experts on the dangers of cell phone radiation, but it's not just cell phones. It's across the board, ehtrust.org. And I get real emotional about this because I sit here 20 years on air, literally seeing thousands of news articles. While we've been talking, for the TV viewers, we've been throwing up mainstream science studies. It's not debatable. The question is, how bad is it? It's not a question of, is it bad? It's how bad. And then all these medical doctors about the skyrocketing brain cancer they're seeing, always on the side of the head of where people use the phones. It's got to stop. People have got to get out of the habit. Potentially, this could end up being bigger than cigarettes. And they've done mouse studies. We've got one of those from PubMed. Mobile phone radiation induces mode-dependent DNA damage in mouse. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. with the type of stuff that this is, and manipulating the melatonin. And that's what I've noticed, Doctor, in closing is, where do you see this going? A, B, it seems like people that I know that use cell phones are addicted to them. There'll be a landline right there and they won't use it with zero radiation. And I've seen studies where they say it can heat the brain 1 degree and that it does show heightened activity in the brain, that it almost has a speed effect. Is that accurate?
Well, we are concerned that it looks like it stimulates dopamine, which is drugs, sex, rock and roll, and maybe cell phones do stimulate the brain.
There you go.
And it could be a physiological component to the addiction. That is an example of why we need a major research program in this field. And I think that we will soon be getting it because people are going to demand it. Now, let me be clear. The research is not all uniformly showing a problem. There is a substantial body of research that says there's no problem at all. And guess what? It's been paid for the most part, by the industry. And that unfortunately creates a very difficult problem for anyone trying to look at the data, because industry has also influenced many official assessments of the problem. They have not influenced the Israeli government, fortunately. They have not influenced the French, by the way. And those governments, as well as some in India, have recently called for severe limits on the use of cell phones by children. In Belgium, it's against the law for a 7-year-old to be given a cell phone. And
I think it should be. I really do. It's just.
Well, let me just say this. Cell phones have revolutionized our ability to respond to emergencies and our ability to do business, especially in remote areas. There's no question about it. People have a right to know. It's the basic principle of democracy. They have the right to know how to use these things more safely.
But a child can't have them until they're at the age of consent, and they have a right to not be given all this stuff and be roasted by it until they're 15 or so. And I just have seen too many of the studies as you have. I just realized that this is an epidemic of cancer. And now the smart meters that I've read are even stronger in some cases. I mean, this is just crazy.
Yeah, we do not have adequate information about all of these things, and that's why it's important that we get it. That's why we do have to have this major funding, 2 cents a month. Would you give 2 cents? And frankly, Alex, I'm launching that right here and now for the first time. We haven't even put it up on our website. Maybe you can help.
I didn't know that. Well, please come back on next week and do a whole, or later in the week, and do a whole hour, and we'll put out your press release and try to help you. That makes perfect sense, though, because we're going to need to create a whole field of science, as you were saying, just to look at this and just to deal with it, because it's connected to, as you said, breast cancer, testicular cancer, brain cancer. This is just an epidemic. Dr. Devra Davis, PhD, MPH, one of the leading experts on microwave radiation and what it's doing to the brain. That's becoming ubiquitous in our culture now, and clearly causing developmental problems that they know the cell phones and tablets are just brain damaging children. That's on record. That's all over the news. But still, nothing's being done. There's no scientific body that looks at what it's specifically doing. Again, cell phones are at the same frequency oscillation, as she was saying, as microwave ovens, meant to get the molecules jumping around. It was invented when troops were using microwave relay systems to heat their food. We showed that on screen earlier, the official history of it. So she's now announced a plan to try to get an initiative going, which we've been part of for about 4 years, to get an initiative for $3 billion to harden the power systems with backup transformers. So if there's a big solar flare, we won't go back to the Stone Ages. That's now, Congress is now looking at that. So there are things we can do. And in closing, Dr. Davis, we'll try to get an article out by tomorrow on what you're calling for here with this video that we're going to then be taking from this live radio show and posting to that article. What more can you say to folks about getting behind this initiative that you're announcing here today?
Well, you are amazing because, frankly, as I was saying at the start of the break, I'm the scientist. I can recognize what we need. I don't know how to make it happen. I completely support your call for a hardened system for the grid. And I would add, it is absolutely insane that we are expanding the use of wireless for businesses right now, because in general, it makes us more vulnerable to many things. It makes us vulnerable to hacking. It's slower, and it endangers our health over the long term. And in fact, it has an effect on wildlife, and including migration and bees, that we just aren't fully understanding. What we can do right now is very simple. Remember, distance is your friend. That's the basic idea. You can use these devices like mine right now is sitting on my table. I wired in with a headset. If you have a wired headset, do not keep the phone on your body in your pocket, because then it's just transmitting into you. In fact, the amount of radiation from your phone that gets into you when it's in your pocket is 2 to 4 times greater than when it's smacked against your head. So right now, we know what to do. Distance is your friend. When a phone is in an area where the signals are weak, you will notice that your battery drains more quickly. That's because the phone is smart. It's programmed to seek a signal. It's draining the battery. When a signal is weak, don't use it unless it's an emergency, because it will drain the battery. And if it's next to your body, it drains it right into you, because cell phone antennas are symmetrical. I am pleased that a number of people in and outside of the government and private sector recognize the importance of trying to reduce this radiation now. And I think that we're going to see soon major manufacturers stepping forward and saying, we now have a safer phone. It's just like cars today. There's no such thing as a safe car. Cars kill people. Well, we have made them safer. They have airbags, seat belts, etc. You would never think of putting a young baby into the front seat of a car anymore. Those kinds of things have resulted in safer cars. We need seat belts and airbags for our phones today. We need to design them with smarter systems for operating and smarter hardware as well. And there are a lot of things that we can do to protect ourselves in the meantime, certainly starting with not having very young children, pregnant women using phones. And men who want to become fathers need to know you don't keep a phone in your pocket when you're trying to make a healthy baby, because cell phone radiation damages sperm count and quality.
All right, well, great job, Dr. Davis. We look forward to having you back for a full hour as soon as you want to. Try to really warn people, because I want to do something about this, because I don't want to see my children die of brain cancer. I don't want to just be roasted by all this Wi-Fi and all these smart meters they're trying to make people take. We've got to step up, and this is a civil rights issue. Thank you so much.